It goes without saying that EarthBound or Mother is one of Nintendo's most iconic series. With its incredible stories, beloved characters, bizarre worlds, iconic visual style, and its incredible use of surrealism, it's no wonder that EarthBound or Mother had amassed its legendary cult following with gamers. And although the series didn't have many games under its belt, there is no doubt that the series had left a considerable impact on Nintendo and video games in general. From the characters appearing in the popular Super Smash Bros. Series to inspiring many indie game projects that used a similar style, the series' legacy looms large in the gaming industry for a good reason. But little did people know that the game that preceded the iconic SNES EarthBound or Mother 2 also had a major impact on gaming, but in a much subtler way that isn't as obvious to the gaming public, and all stemmed from a failed Western release. It was a few years before EarthBound's mid-1990s release, and Mother 1 was going to be the next big release for the NES in the West, and was going to get a special treatment with a careful English translation, extra content, a new save system, and tons of other goodies. But, for reasons we'll get into, the project failed and almost faded into obscurity, only for the game to not only be rescued, but ultimately revolutionize the gaming emulation scene. It's a crazy story that deserves being looked into, which is what we'll be doing today. Today on Beta Quest, we will take a look at the crazy story of Mother 1, aka EarthBound Beginnings, aka EarthBound 0, aka EarthBound with a space between Earth and Bound. Development for Mother 1 began in 1987 by copywriter and celebrity Shigesato Itoi, who was looking for work at Nintendo. Itoi had an idea for an RPG that took place in a contemporary American setting, a radical departure from other RPGs that opted for a sci-fi or fantasy setting, to which the game was kinda going to be a sort of parody of such RPGs. Using Dragon Quest's game design as a basis, the project would combine the American setting with ample amounts of surrealism and humor to create an incredibly unique and unusual game project. The idea and name for the game originated from John Lennon's Mother, which moved Itoi with themes of absentee parents, having dealt with an absentee father himself, and inspired him to move people in a comparable way with some similar ideas. This was actually the origin of the absentee father being represented as a telephone in both Mother 1 and, later on, Mother 2. Itoi also used the name Mother because it had a softer and more feminine feel compared to other RPG titles, which like to focus on epic and grandiose titles like the aforementioned Dragon Quest. A proposal of Itoi's Mother idea was sent to Nintendo, to be reviewed by an obscure and little-known game designer named Shigeru Miyamoto, who rejected it on the basis that celebrity-produced games often failed on the Famicom, as well as the fact that he was unsure that Itoi could pull it off in conjunction with his copywriting job. This news made Itoi so upset he cried on a train ride home, but Miyamoto reconsidered and called Itoi back, albeit on the condition that he can find a way to lighten his workload so he can commit to development. Itoi agreed and did just that, allowing the game to officially begin development with Nintendo R&D products in 1987, with newly formed Ape Incorporated getting involved in the last few months of production in 1989. Development was not without its hardships, however, with Itoi writing the game's more humorous script and having to commute to and from Tokyo regularly, and Miyamoto was even criticized for bringing in this celebrity to work on a major game project, but Miyamoto retained confidence in Itoi regardless. On top of that, it was said that the final parts of the original game were seemingly not properly tested, due to the game being rushed in the final few months, resulting in some of the game's infamous difficulty spikes and unbalanced nature. This was especially the case with Mount Itoi, the final area of the game, to which Itoi was reported to have said whatever to request to balance the region. However, despite these problems, Mother 1 would prevail, and around the same time, the game's famous marketing campaign would be in full swing, including a promotional video that saw Itoi instruct players to play the game at a leisurely pace, and the famous "No Crying Until the End" ad, with a choir version of the game's 8 melodies playing in the background. The game was released on July 27, 1989, to high reviews and decent sales, ironically in part because of Itoi's celebrity status, with praise over the game's unique setting and story while criticizing the balancing issues. Overall, the game did pretty well for itself and will be the beginning of a new series of hopefully big RPGs that Nintendo could call their own. Shortly after Mother 1's 1989 release, Nintendo of America made the decision to have Mother 1 be localized in the West, with a planned release sometime in 1990, seeing how Mother 1 did rather good for itself and wanted to try and make RPGs big in the West. Led by Phil Sandhop, the game underwent very extensive localization efforts for a multitude of reasons, ranging from having to abide by Nintendo of America's strict censorship guidelines to making the script work better in English and be more appealing to American audiences, to even reasons like making the game just seem a little less ridiculous, such as having the town's holiday names being replaced with other names. They also made the decision to change the game's name from Mother to EarthBound with a space, in order to make the game cooler and more marketable, at a time when RPGs were struggling to gain a foothold in the West. An early trademark for the name Spacebound was also done, which was going to be the name instead at one point, but it was decided to go with EarthBound in order to not confuse players, who would think they were getting a space game with that name Spacebound. However, the changes didn't stop there, as it was decided to actually expand the game much further and improve it, with the decision being made to not only rebalance parts of the game, but to add a couple of additional commands, such as the look command, as well as a rainbow backdrop when the 8 melodies were playing, and a run command, which was more of a fast forward button than anything. The running feature was actually meant for debugging purposes, but they decided to keep it in because, it makes the game a little more efficient and convenient, so why not? However, there were 3 substantial changes made to the game that will ultimately cement this version as the optimum version of Mother 1, despite the censorships. The first was that the decision was made to expand the Mount Itoi section with an additional quest to locate the final melody in the region, rather than being warped back to Magic Hint when you found the 7th melody and being taught the final melody, which was in the original version. The second was the decision to expand the end credits considerably, replacing the original text scroll in the final area with a very elaborate sequence of anime pictures, a roll call, and a new credits sequence. The third change was to replace the original password save system with a superior battery backup with 3 save files. Despite all of these major changes and improvements, the localization managed to be completed in 1990 and was pretty much ready to be shipped off, but a planned marketing campaign involving giving the game special treatment would see the release be majorly pushed back into 1991. This was likely because of the aforementioned struggles RPGs had in the West, and Nintendo wanted to make sure that the game would be given ample amounts of attention and care for high sales and ratings. This marketing campaign not only included some advertisements in Nintendo magazines throughout 1990 and 1991, but also a music CD, an elaborate guidebook, and some other things that would be present as well. Unfortunately, the 1991 delay would prove fatal for the project, as 1991 was the year the SNES was going to be released in North America, specifically in August, and Nintendo wanted to focus their efforts on the upcoming Super Nintendo, which was not backwards compatible. Nintendo felt that it would be too risky to release such a huge project on a system that was on its deathbed, especially a project that was getting such an expensive treatment and would require an expansive marketing campaign on top of that, beyond the small ads that were appearing in Nintendo magazines. Not only that, but the changes and expansions made to the game would require massive amounts of memory with an additional battery, which meant an awfully expensive cartridge, too expensive for Nintendo to even want to invest in, considering the concerns above. Unfortunately, due to these factors, it was decided that EarthBound with a space would ultimately be cancelled, but this does not mean that the English version was a complete waste of time or anything. The extensive localization efforts made to the game made Nintendo reformulate their game design methods, with Nintendo now working with their branches around the world to lessen the workload for localization efforts. And, as implied before, the English version was used as the basis for future versions of Mother 1, particularly in the Mother 1 Plus 2 GBA compilation, which used the English localization of Mother 1, but with the Japanese script re-implemented. And, as many of you know, or should know, EarthBound with a space was officially released in the West in 2015 on the Wii U Virtual Console, and later the Switch Online service on February 9th, 2022. The release used the original ROM of the English localization, but retitling the game as EarthBound Beginnings to avoid confusion with the other, more famous EarthBound on the Super Nintendo. So, in the end, Mother 1 finally managed to see a release in the West. But Mother 1's story involved a little more than that, and was influential in another way. Several years after the cancellation of EarthBound, with a space, in 1998, a beta cartridge of the game managed to be located on eBay by the fan translation group Demiforce. An intense effort was made to pull together enough money to acquire the beta cartridge, and the efforts were successful, with the cartridge managing to get in the hands of the fan translators and getting immediately dumped online. However, the most accurate NES emulator at the time, NEStical, was not the best, and Demiforce had to hack the game to make it work properly, which took much longer than intended due to the hacking also triggering anti-piracy measures. In the process, Demiforce would add the subtitle of Zero to allow players to better differentiate this game from the SNES EarthBound. But after all of that, finally, the game managed to work out and was officially released shortly, to tremendous praise, revolutionizing the emulation scene and showcasing that emulation was a viable method of preserving games and prototypes that would otherwise have been lost to time. But considering that Demiforce was known for being a fan translation group, and considering the major differences between EarthBound 0 and the original Mother 1, there was debate over whether or not this EarthBound 0 translation was really from Nintendo or was a major hack from Demiforce themselves. I mean, technically it is, but not in that sense. However, these debates were officially laid to rest following 2004's release of the Mother 1 Plus 2 compilation, to which the version of Mother 1 used in the compilation was pretty much the same as the EarthBound 0 version. Not only that, but years after the fact, when presented the EarthBound 0 ROM, Phil Sandhop even confirmed that the EarthBound 0 ROM was in fact his work, officially confirming that EarthBound 0 was that very localization. Today, EarthBound 0 remains a landmark moment in the video game emulation and preservation scene, along with others such as the Sonic 2 Simon Y prototype, and could even be seen as the driving factor into Mother 1's eventual release in the West as EarthBound Beginnings, using that very English prototype. But that was the story of Mother 1 / EarthBound Beginnings / EarthBound 0 / EarthBound with the space. It's crazy to see how a failed localization will leave so much of an impact on both Nintendo and the gaming emulation scene. Who would have known that this failed localization would cause Nintendo to keep international audiences in mind when developing their games? And to see that this failed English prototype helped revolutionize the gaming emulation scene into this powerhouse that it is now is just, wow, you can't even believe it. And in addition to all this stuff, we also get the official Nintendo release of Mother 1's English version onto the Wii U and Nintendo Switch? Well, that's just amazingly peachy. Mother 1 is quite a remarkable game with a remarkable and important legacy, even if that legacy is quite unusual and not as obvious as its more famous sequel. It may not be the most fun game compared to its sequels, even though it's still a decent game, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. Anyway, this is K-Steel BetaQuest signing out. I will see you all later. This was a Cobalt Steel video by MS Bernie. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Until next time, see you all later. That's not a game console, what the f-